take on the classic division?
My take on Classic Physique is, I think it's a great division. I mean, it's trying to bring back more what people consider old school bodybuilding, which means smaller waist, tapers, not too muscular, but still great conditioning. I feel it's a great division. I mean, I promote amateur shows and I've watched, all the professional shows, and I think a lot of these guys, it gives the guys that don't want to put on that much size or can't put on that much size to be in the open an opportunity to stand on stage and compete. Height to weight ratios is big on that. You're seeing a lot smaller waists, a lot more V-tapers, because as you eat and you continue to grow, you want bigger legs, bigger arms, bigger chest, bigger shoulders. Well, unfortunately, your waist grows at the same time. So you see a lot of these open guys, my waist wasn't what it was when I retired from when I started. The waist grows just like everything else, especially with the core work that we do, the heavy weights that we do, the constant twisting, picking things off the ground. You're going to thicken up your waist some, especially as you get older too. You always notice the older guys have thicker waists. And a lot of these guys nowadays are competing older. It's not just the guys that are in the early 20s or mid 20s or early 30s. I mean, someone like Lee Haney retired 30 years old. So, Dexter Jackson is still going at almost 50. But I would disagree with anyone that tells me Dexter Jackson at almost 50 is better than he was at 35. I don't necessarily believe that, and I don't think he really does deep down inside. But, as we age, everything kind of regresses a little bit. So I think the divisions really open up a lot of opportunity for guys to be able to be who they really want to be and not be forced to become bigger than what their expectations were when they started.
Now, how is the Classic Physique division, right? How is it different than Men's Open? And then I'm going to ask another question leading up to that.
I think the difference between Classic and Physique and Men's Open bodybuilding is the guys aren't as big. The density is not as much, meaning the front to back thickness isn't necessarily there, which is years and years of training and carrying a ton of size. So I think that alone, the waists are smaller in the Classic. Let's be real. I mean, there's going to be some open guys that claim, oh, I have a super small waist, but if you really put a tape measure on, when your body weight's 260 and a guy in a Classic Physique is 200, there's going to be a huge difference in the weight. Doesn't matter what your shoulders offset it or your leg flare offsets it. So there's a big difference in the size and the density. I think the conditioning's close. I think the poses are different. Obviously, you're not doing some of the crazy poses, most musculars and that kind of stuff. I don't think they do that in Classic, but it allows anyone to be able to compete at, so a lot of people do Classic before they move up to Men's Open. It's just a smaller version, streamlined. They're chasing that old school bodybuilding. They talk about the eras of like Schwarzenegger and these guys. I don't think they're necessarily doing that because the conditioning is much greater now. But it's on that scale of the size and the aesthetics, which is important.
Now, during your time when you competed, you could, it's like the mass monsters, they call it. It's branded as that with the Ronnie and your time and stuff like that. And something changed, from the old school, and then you guys created this mass monster look. And then now it seems like that's kind of like the old school. They're leaning more towards again that classic look is coming back. Do you think that the Classic division is ultimately going to replace the mass monster division?
I don't think Classic will ever take the place of Men's Open. I think that Classic doesn't really, this is my opinion, and I've seen it firsthand because I promote shows. And when a guy gets out there and does aesthetic posing, and he poses to slower things and everything's kind of in tune, and you see a lot of, it's very cool to watch, but after a while you see the same routines over and over. There's no excitement to it. When a guy's muscle bound and he's just out there, flexing, getting into crazy most musculars, sticking his tongue out, really getting the crowd fired up, when they want to see beasts battle. Everyone wants to see they want to see the lions fight. They don't want to watch the mice fight, right? So I think that's really what I'm getting to, and that's not an insult to Classic, but I've watched the shows, and the guys, they come out with the same routines. They don't get out there and hit most musculars, and the muscle doesn't pop like crazy. It's conditioning with not crazy density, and there's not a lot of thickness to those physiques. I mean, that's not going to win Classic. So I think you're seeing like a lower version of the men's open, and there's a reason. I mean, the money would have gone straight up. You're still getting huge increases in the men's open at the ultimate show, the Mr. Olympia, where the Classic isn't necessarily going through the roof. I mean, you're getting a lot of competitors, but you know, a lot of them, I mean, they all look pretty much the same. Of like, you know, there's not. I don't really know what the standard is yet. I mean, some guys are super small, and then the other guys, I don't know how you judge in Classic division, especially in Mr. Olympia, when you have a guy that's 6'2" against a guy that's 5'4", because that's ultimately what it comes down to. I mean, some of the guys are still really short. So, you know, bodybuilding ran into that issue and started the 202, 212, because you have people like a Flex Lewis who just, you know, he's shorter, but still can compete in the open, but he's not going to win the Mr. Olympia. He's too short. Dexter Jackson's still a lot taller than Flex Lewis. Okay, it's just, to me, it's just the excitement's still in the men's open. People still want to see the ultimate champion on stage, which, you know, pushing the body limits, if that makes sense. So they want to see mass taken to the next level. But of course, with the symmetry and the conditioning, people love Big Ramy. I mean, who wouldn't want to look at that? Because I even look at it and say it's just mind-boggling how big this guy gets. And remember, I competed against the greatest ever, Ronnie Coleman, who was from another planet. But Big Ramy's just, he takes the cake on the size. I mean, you can't even believe a body can push to that and still be in great condition. So we're still seeing bodybuilding evolve, but there's going to be a very few like Big Ramys or Ronnie Colemans that come on the scene that are just outrageously much bigger than everyone else, and the level of conditioning that's much greater than everyone else. So I think, you know, the Classic will always be, I think it's going to be great. On the amateur level, I think it's bigger than men's bodybuilding. I think men's physique on the amateur level is bigger than men's bodybuilding, but I have a hard time believing that the board shorts or Classic is ever going to take over the open bodybuilding, because people still want to pay to see the ultimate.
And it's going to be a follow-up question to that. So it's two things happening. It's the fans and it's the athletes, right? And the Classic division is the most growing division, rapid division. So, and you can see like a lot of guys are coming down from men's open, like Regan Grimes. He came down, and that was a big thing, right? And a lot of guys are now, you think the reason why is because it's more attainable, and ultimately you think, yeah, we want to see the monsters, because you know what? You go to a ball game, you want to see Michael Jordan put that ball in the hoop that somebody else you can't see at the park does it, right? But that's from the fans' perspective. But a lot of athletes are saying, well, this is more attainable. I don't have to push my body as much. I know it's new, but ultimately, you know.
I think that people commonly say things because they listen to the media. And I can tell you this, and this is through my experience, and this will kind of somewhat answer that question of like why do people choose it over men's bodybuilding? What's the choice? I started off as a heavyweight bodybuilder, meaning I started training at 200. Okay, the first year of training, I gained 50 pounds. So here I am at 50 pounds later, within 6 months actually, and dieting down to compete. In my first show, I was still over 198. So that still put me as a heavyweight. Okay, they had no super heavy division. I always had wide shoulders. I had not super small waist. I had big round muscle tissue, okay? So early on, and when I was 20 years old, after I won the Teenage Nationals against Branch Warren, I mean, we competed together, my structure was superior to a lot of people's structure. I was never going to be a Classic. I was never going to be a men's physique. I was always bred to be an open bodybuilder. Hence, years later, I won the Mr. Olympia. I think when you're born, like, listen, some people go to the gym and they make progress, and they're just destined to be just 250, 60, 70 pounds, whatever it may be. there's very few Mr. Olympias walking around potential out there, okay? There's only been 13 in history. Now, granted, there could have been more if people think the judging was swayed a little bit. But realistically, it's very, very hard for a guy like me, even now, being retired, I'm trying to lose muscle mass, okay? And I'm still sitting at 240 pounds. Because it's not easy to lose that muscle because genetically, it's just very hard to do. Now, if I cut eating and training altogether, maybe I could lose that weight and drop back down. But you can remember, when I started without lifting weights, I was 200 pounds. So I think people talk about, oh, well, I don't want to get that big because they think, okay, it requires a ton of eating, it requires a ton of drugs, it requires hindering relationships. You hear the stories. I mean, even I've told these stories about how I sacrificed relationships and the years and years of pounding away at the gym and trying to develop my body and bring up weak body parts. But I truly believe that a lot of people out there would like to be a Mr. Olympia competitor on the men's open side, but they think, okay, well, I'll move to Classic. Just like Reagan's going to be on the Olympia stage, almost, he could be Mr. Olympia men's open at some point. I think he's a one and done guy in this Classic Mr. Olympia contest he's doing now, because I know he's going to have trouble bringing the weight down to 222 or whatever he has to be for his height to weight ratio. And he's bred for bodybuilding. I mean, we've already seen great success. He's already got second in pro shows. He's a young kid. There's a lot of potential there to be a men's open bodybuilder. But as far as the Classic stuff, like, yes, some people don't want to get mass like that to be able to compete in the men's open, but you have a handful of guys that would give anything to be able to compete in the open class. And a lot of bodybuilders don't make it in the open class, so they fall down into Classic. Well, guess what? The waist isn't small enough, or the lines aren't good enough, and then they're pushed out. But guess what? In 5 years, watch the comeback in the sport of bodybuilding in the men's open side. Because people are going to realize they're not in men's physique, they're not in Classic physique, they're going to have to go back to bodybuilding. And we're going to see a refresh in the whole bodybuilding market within 3 to 5 years is my prediction. And it's going to make me look very good on this interview when it does happen. They need to find their place, and they're really confused on where they want to be right now.